I knocked on that door expecting just another noise complaint. Teenagers drunk, maybe a neighbor dispute at worst. It was an ordinary house tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac, completely dark, dead quiet, but the smell, that heavy mix of burnt incense and something else, iron, maybe blood, immediately set me on edge. I rang the bell. No answer. I walked around the side, and that's when I heard it, a whispered chant rising from the basement, voices in unison, like a distorted prayer. I called for backup over the radio, but before I got a response, the back door was slightly open, and there, in the dim light, I saw eyes staring at me from the shadows. I stepped inside. Each floorboard creaked under my boots, the voices growing louder, more urgent. I made my way down the stairs, weapon drawn, and what I saw froze my blood. They were on their knees in a circle, bare-chested, covered in symbols. In the center, an unconscious woman, and a blade raised above her. Then they saw me, and started, chanting my name. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 38 years old, and I've spent 14 of those years serving in the Eastbridge Police Department, a forgotten town on the map of Indiana, where everyone believes they know each other, until something like this happens. I joined the force after my brother disappeared when he was 17. He was never found. All that was left behind was the silence of my mother and the hollow stare of my father, who was never the same again. I was the younger one, the one who stayed. And ever since, I've carried the weight of trying to understand evil before it swallows someone else. I've always been the kind of cop who believes real danger isn't the one that screams in your face. It's the one that whispers through the cracks. The one that hides behind curtains drawn in the middle of the day. The one that smiles while it hides terror beneath the surface. Over the years, I've seen it all. Domestic violence dressed up as "she fell down the stairs." Kids crying in silence because they knew no one would listen. Gangs dissolving only to reappear under new names. Nothing shocked me anymore, or at least that's what I told myself. My partner, Mike Donovan, is my opposite. Ex-Marine, 3 kids, loud laugh, and an uncanny ability to spot a lie a mile away. He believes in the power of protocol. I believe in the power of instinct, and even though we disagree on nearly everything, we've always known how to trust each other when things went sideways. But that night, I was, alone. They put me on an extra shift because the central dispatch was overloaded, and I had already been awake for nearly 30 hours. Bad coffee, static on the radio, and the constant sound of rain tapping against the windshield. It was a Tuesday, one of those that normally passes without leaving a trace, but something about that night had been bothering me from the start. A feeling deep in my chest, a kind of nausea that didn't come from food. It came from the air, the atmosphere, from something I couldn't quite name. I consider myself a hard man, but I have my cracks. I have nightmares, dreams about doors that won't open, faceless voices, my brother calling out from somewhere I can't reach. I've thought about quitting. I've stared at my gun in silence, wondering if it's worth pretending I can fix the world. But every time that thought comes, I remember the promise I made to my mother, that I would never let another kid disappear without a fight. That's why, that night, when the radio crackled with a noise complaint in a quiet residential area, one that had already been reported a few times before, always filed away for lack of evidence, I didn't hesitate. Even though I was tired, even though I was alone, even though that sick feeling in my gut was screaming at me to walk away, I went, because this wasn't just another call. I didn't know what it was yet, but something told me there was something rotten in that house. I went because that's what I do, because if there's one thing I've learned in all these years, it's that evil rarely knocks on the door. It waits still in the darkness, hoping someone has the guts to turn on the light. And that night, I was the one who turned it on. The call came in at 10:47 p.m. The dispatcher's voice was flat, almost bored, like he was reading off a takeout menu. Any available unit. Noise complaint at 1845 Laurel Creek Drive. Strange sounds reported coming from the basement. Anonymous caller. I was parked in front of a closed gas station, scribbling nonsense in an old notepad just to stay awake. But when I heard that address, I froze. Laurel Creek. That name wasn't unfamiliar. I dug through my memory and it hit me. About 2 months earlier, we'd responded to a call on that very same street. A woman had reported her neighbor burying something in his backyard during the night. When we showed up, everything was clean. The guy, a retired theology professor named Arthur Klein, was polite, calm, showed us the yard, clean, hands, nothing out of place. We brought in the dogs, nothing. The report was closed as unfounded, but something about him, His eyes, cold, too polite. It stuck with me. And now, the same street, again. I grabbed the radio and told dispatch I was headed to the location. I requested backup from Donovan, but he was tied up handling a bar fight across town. Estimated time to the scene, 15 minutes. I got there in 10, and with every mile, the unease in my gut grew stronger, like I was being drawn to something, not by duty but by gravity. On the way, I pulled up the address history on the patrol car's onboard computer. 4 prior complaints in the last 3 years, 2 for noise, 1 for a strange smell coming from the house, and another for weird rituals, according to a neighbor. All of them closed. No victims, no charges, just paperwork collecting dust. As the windshield wipers struggled against the rain, I pulled out my phone and checked the neighborhood map. House 1845 sat at the very end of the road next to an empty lot. No security cameras nearby, no businesses close. Isolated, perfect for anyone who didn't want to be seen. As I neared the street, I noticed something eerie. Every house was dark, lights off, but that one house had a single window lit on the second floor, a faint yellow light, and nothing else. No noise, no movement. I parked half a block away and killed the engine. The rain had eased, but the air felt heavier. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my weapon, took a breath, radioed in. Dispatch, this is Unit 1207 arriving on scene. No exterior activity visible. Proceeding to investigate. Standing by for backup. There was a delay. 1 second too long. Then, copy Unit 1207. Reinforcements en route. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes and too long. Long enough for anything to happen. I stepped out of the patrol car and approached the gate. It creaked loudly in the stillness, metal scraping metal. I rang the bell. Nothing. Knocked 3 times, with the side of my flashlight. Silence. Then I heard it. A sharp sound. Glass shifting. From inside, I moved toward the back. The backyard was narrow, barely lit by a lone bulb above the rear door. But what I saw below the window stopped me cold. The soil was disturbed, recently dug, shovel marks, and beside them, a makeshift altar, extinguished candles, a small animal skull, maybe a goat, and what looked like a burnt photo, face down. The back door was ajar. Warm air leaked out, thick with that same heavy scent, incense and something far worse. I crouched, drew my weapon and pushed the door open with my boot. It groaned like something out of a horror movie. My heart pounded, but my hand was steady. Adrenaline does that. It freezes you and pushes you forward at the same time. Inside, total darkness, except for a faint light down the hall to the left. I crept forward, floorboards groaning under my boots. The walls were lined with strange paintings, symbols I didn't recognize, human figures inside circles, red eyes painted everywhere watching me. The sensation of being watched was constant, like I had walked into something forbidden. Then I heard it again, a drum beat, faint but steady. Voices, many voices, chanting in a slow guttural tone. The sound came from the basement. The door was slightly open, and behind it, a narrow staircase, flickering candlelight below. I radioed in. Dispatch, this is Unit 1207, inside the residence. Suspicious activity in basement. Sounds of multiple individuals, requesting immediate backup. Static, then silence. Radio dead, no signal. I was alone, and now, completely cut off. The house looked abandoned at first glance. Peeling paint, faded siding, windows shut tight with heavy curtains that let no light escape. But there was something off. The grass was trimmed with unnatural precision. The porch steps were spotless despite the rain. Someone maintained this place obsessively. I climbed the 3 porch steps, flashlight in one hand. The iron handrail was cold and slick. That smell, incense mixed with something metallic, blood perhaps, hung thick in the air. I rang the doorbell again. No response. Knocked harder this time. Nothing. Silence so deep it seemed to press against my ears. Then a sound, sharp, like glass groaning, from behind the house. I moved around the side, flashlight sweeping through shadows. The backyard was narrow, barely illuminated by a flickering yellow bulb over the back door. But what I saw beneath the window made my stomach clench. The earth had been freshly dug, shovel marks everywhere, and right beside it, an improvised altar, burned out candles, an animal skull, a goat perhaps, and a scorched photograph turned face down. The back door was ajar. Heat radiated from inside. carrying that oppressive, choking smell. I crouched, drew my weapon, and nudged the door open with my boot. It groaned loudly. My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady. Training. Instinct. They take over when fear wants to paralyze you. Inside, total darkness, except for a faint glow down the hallway to the left. Every step creaked beneath my boots, each one echoing like a warning. The walls were lined with strange frames, symbols I didn't recognize, red eyes painted on canvas and wood always watching. It felt like walking into a trap. Then I heard it again, a drum beat, low and distant, steady as a heartbeat, and voices, many voices chanting in unison, a guttural melody like something ancient, primal. The sound was coming from the basement. The door was slightly open, and behind it, a staircase, steep and narrow, lit by the flicker of candlelight. I radioed in. Dispatch, Unit 1207 entered residence. Suspicious activity detected. Sounds of possible group gathering in basement. Requesting immediate backup. Only static answered. The radio had gone dead. Alone. Isolated. Cut off. I stepped to the basement door. The air was hotter now. Heavy like it was. Alive. The first step groaned under my weight, then the next. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became. Incense, sweat, and blood. Shadows danced along the stone walls, thrown by candlelight below, as if the walls themselves were moving. At the bottom, I reached a cavernous room. The basement opened wide, larger than any blueprint would have shown. The walls were draped in black cloth, marked with symbols painted in red. A stone slab stood in the center, like an altar, surrounded by 8 figures kneeling, shirtless, heads bowed. And at the center, a woman, young, unconscious or drugged. Her body was tied with thick rope, symbols painted across her chest. A red eye at the center, just like the ones on the walls. One of the hooded figures looked up and locked eyes with me. His eyes were white, no pupils, no iris. He smiled, slowly raised a long, curved knife, its hilt carved into the shape of a skull. The blade gleamed in the candlelight. He spoke, and it wasn't a shout. It was calm, steady, almost welcoming. He has arrived, just as foretold. The others began to chant, louder now. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. My body locked up for a moment. That voice, it wasn't loud, but it struck me like thunder. Human, yes, but how the hell did he know my name? I hadn't spoken. No one here was supposed to know who I was. A cold sweat ran down my back. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and weapon, stepped down the last stair, and entered the room fully. The air was suffocating, thick with heat, incense, and something raw, primal, blood. The woman on the stone altar groaned softly, her chest rising and falling in slow, shallow breaths. She was alive, but barely. The hooded figures remained on their knees, swaying back and forth, their chant growing louder, echoing off the stone walls like a storm building from all sides. My instinct screamed at me to act. I raised my weapon, voice sharp and commanding. Police, drop the weapon. Get on the ground. Now. The man holding the knife turned slowly toward me. His eyes were still white, blind or possessed. I couldn't tell. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Instead, he lifted something in his other hand and held it up toward me. It was a photograph, and when I saw it, the world cracked open. It was me and my brother. Childhood, backyard, the same photo my mother kept in a locked box at home, one no one outside the family had ever seen. The same tear on the corner, the same dog in the background. That photo had never left our house, yet here it was in the hands of a stranger who now stepped toward me with deliberate calm. I shouted again, voice hoarse, "Drop it, I will shoot." He didn't. He smiled, and then spoke again, softly. "You don't remember, but you've been here before. You and your brother. One stayed, the other ran. Now it's time to finish what you started." My knees buckled slightly. My mind reeled. Suddenly, I wasn't just a cop in a basement. I was that boy, again, running through the rain. A house behind me, screams echoing in my ears, my brother's voice calling my name, and me, too afraid to go back. It hit me like a freight train. The memories, the flashes, the nightmare that haunted me for years, doors that wouldn't open, voices in the dark, and my brother crying out. This was it. This was where it happened. This wasn't just a random cult. This wasn't just a crime scene. This was my past, alive, waiting for me. The man dropped the photo at my feet. I stared down at it, hands shaking. The chanting reached a fever pitch. They were calling my name again, louder, faster, like some kind of twisted welcome. The knife gleamed above the woman's chest. I had seconds to act. I could feel it. Every decision I ever made had led to this moment, and whatever I chose next, there was no turning back. The world seemed to stop spinning. Everything moved in slow motion. The flicker of the candles, the chanting that echoed like thunder, and that cursed photograph lying at my feet. My vision tunneled. I knelt and picked it up, hoping I was wrong. But I wasn't. It was real. Every detail matched. The backyard swing, the dog in the corner, the tear along the edge. That photo belonged in my mother's attic. Yet here it was, in the hands of a man who shouldn't have even known I existed. My mouth went dry. "Drop the knife. I swear to God I'll shoot," I shouted. But the man, calm as death, turned to face me. He pulled back his hood slowly. And when his face was revealed, I staggered. I knew him. Not from police files, not from any criminal database. I knew him from my childhood. Mr. Wallace, the reclusive neighbor who lived 3 houses down from us when we were kids. Always alone, always watching from his porch with those cold, lifeless eyes. My mother used to tell us to stay away from him. She said he was troubled. And then, shortly after my brother disappeared, Wallace vanished too. And now he was here, standing in front of me. Older, thinner, but unmistakably the same man. He took a step toward me, that same eerie smile on his lips. "You've felt it your whole life, haven't you? The unease, the nightmares. You've been called here, Daniel, back to where it began." I raised my weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. Every muscle in my body screamed to end this now, but I couldn't move. My mind was unraveling. The other figures stood slowly, moving in unison, their faces still hidden under hoods. The chanting stopped. Only Wallace spoke now. His voice filled the room. "You left him here. That night, you ran." He stayed. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. He reached into his robes and pulled out something else. A silver chain. Hanging from it, a small pendant, shaped like a lightning bolt. I fell to my knees. It was my brother's. A gift from our father. He never took it off. Wallace tossed it to the ground in front of me. "We didn't kill him. He was chosen. He opened the door for us. And now you must close it." Behind him, the woman on the altar stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. She groaned, tried to speak, but only a whisper came out. "Please." I looked at her, at the pain on her face, at the ropes cutting into her skin, at the symbols smeared across her chest. She wasn't just a victim. She was the next sacrifice, the continuation of whatever twisted ritual had started with my brother. Wallace knelt beside her, lifted the knife again. It must be done. The circle must be complete. And then, in the dim candlelight, I saw it, carved into the altar just beneath her body. A name, my brother's name, Matthew Reyes. It wasn't over. It had never ended. I wasn't just a witness. I was part of it. And now, I had to choose. My heart was pounding in my chest, but it wasn't just fear. It was shame, guilt, the unbearable weight of a truth I had buried for over 2 decades. I wasn't just a cop who stumbled upon a cult. I was the boy who had run, the boy who left his brother behind in that basement. I had always wondered why the nightmares never stopped, why I couldn't remember certain parts of my childhood, why I felt this fracture inside me, something wrong, something broken. I told myself it was trauma, but deep down, I always knew. Now it was no longer a theory. The altar, the pendant, the photograph, Wallace, it all screamed the same truth. This wasn't the first time I had been here. I had stood on those stairs before. I had heard my brother scream. For me. And I ran. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my weapon to the ground and fall apart. But there wasn't time for that. Wallace was standing over the girl again, blade raised, and the rest of the hooded figures were closing in. The chanting had returned. Softer now, but heavier, like the sound of dirt being shoveled over a coffin. I stood frozen. My gun aimed at Wallace, finger on the trigger, but I didn't pull it. Because inside me, 2 voices were battling. One said, "Shoot him. Stop this. Save her." The other whispered, "What if he's right? What if this is your fault? What if the only way to end it is to finish what you started?" The voices overlapped with the past. I could hear Matthew crying. I could see myself, a scrawny kid, muddy, barefoot, hiding behind a shed while the rain poured down. I remembered the fear, the paralysis, And I remembered lying, telling Mom I didn't know where Matt went, telling the cops I fell asleep and didn't hear anything, telling myself none of it was real. I lowered the gun for a second, just one, and Wallace saw it. He took a step toward me, slowly, carefully, as if I were some sacred piece finally returning to its place. "You feel it now, don't you?" he said softly. "This isn't about justice, it's about balance. The circle was broken, now you can make it whole again." He offered the knife to me, handle first. The other figures stopped chanting. The woman on the altar whimpered, weak, barely able to lift her head. But her eyes, they locked onto mine, and in them I saw my brother's eyes, not as he was during the ritual, but from before, at home, laughing, alive. And just like that, something snapped in me, because I realized Wallace was wrong. The circle wasn't mine to close. It was mine to break. I raised my weapon again, steadier this time. I was no longer a child, and I wasn't going to run. Everything went silent. Wallace stood in front of me, holding out the knife like it was some kind of offering, like I was meant to take it, to complete a ritual older than my memory. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking, his face calm, certain. He believed I would accept it, that after all these years, after all the running, I would finally surrender. Behind him, the girl whimpered again. Her lips moved, but no sound came. I could barely hear her breath. She was slipping, and I was out of time. My hand didn't tremble this time. My grip tightened on the gun, and in that moment, crystal clear, heart hammering, I made my choice. "You're wrong, Wallace," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the silence like a blade. I didn't come back to finish anything. I came to end this. He didn't flinch, just smiled. "Then pull the trigger, Daniel, and seal your fate." I fired. The shot cracked through the basement like thunder. Wallace staggered backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. His expression never changed, still calm, still smiling, even as he fell to his knees and then collapsed. The knife clattered to the ground. For a second, no one moved. The hooded figures froze. Then one of them lunged at me, screaming, a sound not quite human, raw and violent. I fired again. Another dropped. The others retreated, slinking into the shadows, disappearing behind the altar, into passageways I hadn't even noticed before. It didn't matter. I wasn't there for them. I rushed to the girl. Her skin was cold, but she was alive. I untied the ropes, murmuring to her, trying to keep her conscious. "Stay with me. I've got you." She blinked slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks, and whispered one word, "Daniel." My blood ran cold. She didn't know my name. She couldn't have, but she did. I didn't ask how. I just picked her up and ran. The basement felt like it was collapsing around me, the walls closing in, the darkness thickening. The stench of blood and incense burned in my lungs. But I didn't stop. Up the stairs, through the hallway, out the back door into the rain, threw her into the backseat of the patrol car, grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 1207. Suspect down. I have a live victim. I need immediate backup and medical. Repeat, immediate." This time, the radio worked. "Copy, 1207. Units en route. ETA, 2 minutes." I looked back at the house. The lights were out, the windows dark, silent. I had no idea where the others had gone, or how deep that place really went, but Wallace was dead, and the girl was alive. I had made my choice, and for the first time in 20 years, I didn't run. The sirens shattered the night like a war cry, flooding Laurel Creek Drive with pulsing red and blue lights. Within minutes, the house was surrounded. Patrol cars, ambulances, even the county chopper circling above, its spotlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. I sat on the curb, drenched, shivering under a blanket someone had thrown over my shoulders. My hands still trembled, my ears ringing from gunfire and adrenaline, but I couldn't take my eyes off the house. Paramedics lifted the girl, Julia Banks, I would later learn, onto a stretcher. She was conscious, barely, her eyes locked on mine, and she gripped my hand like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Then she was gone, rushed into the ambulance, leaving me alone in the chaos. Donovan arrived moments later, his cruiser skidding to a stop. He jumped out, eyes scanning everything, then landed on me. "Jesus, Reyes, what the hell happened?" I couldn't speak, just shook my head. He crouched beside me, silent for a moment, then patted my shoulder. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, a dry, hollow sound. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. "Worse," I muttered. I saw the past. SWAT teams entered the house, clearing each room with precision. But when they came out, they were confused. No suspects, no cultists, no bodies, no blood. Even Wallace's body, gone. I told them what I saw, gave my full statement. The photos, the pendant, the chanting, the basement. They looked at me like I'd lost it. The captain pulled me aside gently, asked if I'd taken anything. Pills, stimulants, anything at all. I said no. He nodded, not convinced. The official report labeled it a disturbance with possible hallucinatory elements. The house? Scheduled for demolition years ago. Uninhabited, they said. Condemned. The basement? According to them, didn't exist. Just an old crawl space with collapsed beams. I knew what they were. Thinking that I broke under pressure, that I imagined it all. I didn't care. I had proof. The photo Wallace dropped, still in my pocket. And Julia, she remembered. Not everything, but enough. She spoke of voices, of shadows, of a man who whispered my name before I arrived. Her statement was buried in the report, redacted. They wanted it gone, forgotten, but I couldn't forget, not anymore. I was placed on mandatory leave, psychological evaluation pending. Standard protocol, they said. I didn't argue. I went back to the house 2 days later, alone. No badge, no backup. What I found shook me more than anything else. The house was gone. Nothing but an empty lot, overgrown grass, no rubble, no evidence it had ever been there. I checked the records again. The demolition order had been filed 20 years ago, the same year my brother disappeared. I stood there in that silence and took out the photograph, the one from Wallace, turned it over. There was writing on the back now. It hadn't been there before. You returned, Daniel, but this is only the beginning. 2 days later, still on leave and drowning in unanswered questions, I received a call. It was from the hospital. Julia Banks had requested to see me, urgently. No one knew why. She refused to speak to any other officer, only me. They allowed the visit with conditions, discreet, off the record. When I entered the hospital room, I barely recognized her. She looked fragile, pale, the IV feeding slowly into her arm. But her eyes, those eyes were sharp, awake, like someone who had stared into darkness and survived it. She smiled when she saw me, a small, tired smile. I knew you'd come, she said softly. I pulled up a chair beside her bed, unsure of what to expect. She spoke before I could. They're still out there, Daniel. Maybe not in that house, maybe not with those faces, but they didn't vanish. They just changed shape. I didn't answer, just waited. She continued. What happened to me wasn't random. I was targeted, chosen. Wallace, he knew things about me, things I've never told anyone. My fears, my regrets. He said I was perfect for the offering, that my pain made me pure. Her voice cracked at that word, pure, as if it still tasted rotten in her mouth. He also spoke about you. I stiffened. He said you would come, that you'd been here before, that this was a reunion. Her gaze locked onto mine. Is it true? Had you been there before? I swallowed hard, nodded once. She didn't flinch, just exhaled, like she had expected the answer. Then she reached to the table beside her bed and handed me something wrapped in cloth. I opened it carefully. Inside was a small, rusted pendant, the same symbol from the basement, the eye. She pointed to it. I found it in my hand when I woke up. I don't remember how it got there, but there's something on the back. I turned it over. A number, etched deep into the metal, 22D 1988. I froze. That was the year my brother disappeared. That number, a location code, District 22D Eastbridge, the block where we grew up. It wasn't over. Julia grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. This isn't about just me, or you. They've done this before, many times, and they'll do it again. She paused, her voice trembling. When you killed Wallace, it didn't end. It started something. I stared at the pendant, my mind racing. He said my brother opened a door. What if it's still open? She nodded. And now, they're waiting for you to finish it or to stop it. She leaned in, whispering, you have to go back, not to that house, but to where it all began. I stood slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. But there was no denying the truth anymore. I wasn't done, and neither were they. I drove around the city like a ghost after leaving the hospital. Julia's words echoed in my mind. They'll do it again, And now they're waiting for you. Everything she said felt like a lock clicking into place. A puzzle I'd been carrying my whole life, finally starting to make sense. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence for a long time. Then I walked straight to the closet in my bedroom and opened the lockbox I hadn't touched in over a decade. Inside were fragments of the life I'd tried to forget. A torn drawing, a toy sheriff's badge, an old tape labeled Summer 1988, and the original photo, the one Wallace had somehow held in his hand. Same tear on the corner, same details. But one thing was different now. Wallace's version had writing on the back, "You returned, Daniel, but this is only the beginning." I laid both photos side by side on the floor and stared at them. I couldn't deny it anymore. This was personal. I picked up the pendant Julia had given me, 22D 1988. I pulled the city records, and sure enough, District 22D was a zone condemned and leveled after a fire. A cluster of homes had once stood there, including one just 2 blocks from where I'd grown up, a house I'd never remembered clearly, a house my parents had moved us out of then shortly after Maddie vanished. There was a foundation still registered on the property, a basement that was never fully demolished, a concrete shell beneath overgrown weeds and silence, and I knew that's where it started. That's where it ended for my brother. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a cop. I didn't feel like a victim either. I felt like someone reborn in the ruins of what he once ran from. All my life I had been chasing justice in the name of others, victims, strangers, criminals, but I had never turned inward, never acknowledged the child inside me who had been paralyzed by fear and shame, never mourned my brother properly, never faced the fact that I had survived, and he hadn't, but now I had. And in that moment, I changed. I wasn't seeking closure. I wasn't looking to bring someone to trial or file a report. What I needed was deeper. I needed to go back, not for evidence, but for truth. I packed a flashlight, my service weapon, a notebook, and both photos. I left my badge on the kitchen table. I wasn't going as Officer Daniel Reyes. I was going as a brother, as someone who once ran from the fire and now had to walk through it. Because sometimes justice isn't about what you prove, it's about what you're willing to face, so no one else has to. I returned to District 22D 3 nights later, under a sky so dark it swallowed the stars. The condemned zone had become a ghost field. Tall grass, broken fences, scraps of concrete forgotten by time. The city had paved over the truth, quite literally, but some things refused to stay buried. I parked my truck by the rusted fence and walked the last 100 yards in silence. The pendant from Julia hung around my neck, cold against my chest. The photograph was in my back pocket. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the overgrowth until I found it. The cracked slab of concrete where house number 1187 used to stand. I cleared the weeds. Beneath them, hidden under moss and rot, was a rusted hatch. I didn't hesitate. The metal groaned under my grip. I pulled it open and descended into the dark. The air was thick, musty, and wrong. The walls were damp. The earth smelled like decay and memory. I followed a narrow corridor down into what looked like an old storm cellar, but I knew it was more than that. The floor was covered in broken boards and candle wax. Ashes still clung to the corners, and in the center, almost untouched by time, was a wooden cross, charred and broken. I approached it slowly, heart pounding, every step heavier than the last. That's when I saw the bones, human remains, wrapped in fragments of old, blood-stained cloth, a child's shoe, a silver lightning bolt pendant, identical to the one Wallace had shown me, and beside it, a small water-damaged notebook. I knelt down, hands shaking, and opened it. The first few pages were smeared beyond recognition, but one page, one single heartbreaking page, was clear. "Dan, I'm scared. I can't hear you anymore. I hope you come back soon." The handwriting was unmistakable. My brother's. I couldn't move. I just sat there, tears streaming down my face, gripping that notebook like it was the last part of him left in this world. And maybe it was. I didn't call it in, not right away. I sat with him, with the truth, with the guilt that had followed me all my life, and, finally, felt something else. Peace. When I climbed back out, the sky was starting to lighten. Not quite dawn, but close. I walked back to the truck, opened my phone, and called it in. I gave no details, no story, just this. Uncovered human remains. Possible cold case from 1988. Sending location now. I left the notebook and pendant in a sealed evidence bag beside the bones. Let them do their job. Let them write their report. But for me, the case was closed. Not because the system would fix it, but because I faced what I'd run from. And for the first time in my life, I kept a promise I made to my brother. Matthew Reyes was finally laid to rest on a cold, gray morning, nearly 25 years after he disappeared. There was no crowd, just my mother, fragile and silent, holding his old toy sheriff's badge in her trembling hands. A priest recited prayers that seemed too light for the weight of that moment, and I stood there, no longer in uniform, watching as the past was lowered into the ground. I didn't cry at the burial. I had shed all my tears in that basement in the darkness where his life had ended and mine had fractured. What I felt now wasn't sadness. It was something heavier, but clearer. Resolution. When the service ended, my mother placed the pendant around my neck, the one Matthew wore, the one I had recovered. She didn't ask where I found it, didn't need to. Her eyes met mine, and I knew she understood. The silence we both carried for decades was broken. That afternoon I turned in my resignation, not because I stopped believing in the badge, but because I realized some things exist outside the reach of law, things that haunt the cracks in our reality. Evil doesn't always wear a mask or carry a gun. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it waits, and sometimes it takes people no one notices until it's too late. I no longer chase criminals. I chase truth, patterns, symbols, disappearances dismissed as accidents, cults disguised as charities, neighborhoods that go quiet for reasons no one talks about. I'm not the same man I was. I no longer believe in coincidence. I believe in darkness, and in facing it, even when no one else sees it. The night before I left town, I received a letter, no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten, "You broke the circle," but the I never closes. Taped to the page was a key, old, rusted, engraved with a new number, 1989. Another year, another cycle. It wasn't over, but I was ready, because the lesson I learned is this: sometimes the monsters aren't strangers. Sometimes they wear familiar faces and hide in forgotten places. And sometimes, the only way to stop them is to go where no one else will, into the darkness, armed with nothing but truth, and the will to never run again. If you've listened to this story, know this: there's a reason you found it. Maybe you've heard whispers. Maybe you've felt something calling. Maybe you've seen things no one believes. You're not crazy, you're not alone, and if that darkness ever calls your name, don't run. Stand because someone has to.